Greetings, Travis.
Hey,
As I
Peter,
always
how are you?
say, good. As I always say, make it happen.
Um,
It's a little early for cocktails, but this we'll get brewing here. So thanks for joining us on our Friends of Fifth Line special.
Mhm.
As I'm starting to call it with some of my contacts, Friends of Pete. Over the many years that you and I have known each other.
So you're doing three of these? No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, me, myself, and I. So, but it's our goal is obviously to enlighten our community, our venture community out there, and obviously the younger entrepreneurs who are out there looking for venture debt, who are trying to raise capital, who are growing companies, who are looking for insights into the venture community, and really just to get to know some of the players out in the venture space. Um, so just for our folks' benefit, my name is Peter Vendoris. I am advisor to the founders for Fifth Line Capital. We are a venture debt and financial service advisory firm based here in Boston. And with me today is Travis Drouin. He is the managing partner of the National Technology Portfolio at Baker Tilly. So welcome, Travis.
Thanks, Pete. Glad to be here.
Good. Well, awesome. So one of the things that I was thinking about is, I've known you for, I think since 2011, 12, when
Seems like earlier, perhaps, but yeah,
I
it's been a
know,
while. Yeah.
feels like we've been around the block together. And, you know, we, I started a tech practice for East West Bank here in Boston with Phil Ernst, and we were, I think, I forget who. Oh, is who's the redhead woman that introduced us? Right. You know who I'm talking about. Oh, Bonnie Wright, Cassie Wright.
Uh, Connie?
Connie
Connie,
Wright.
right. Yeah, yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah, so she introduced us, and that's how we started to chat and get along, and obviously become really good friends.
Sure. Yeah.
And I remember when I met with her, I met at Phil's Bakery in Millis when he just launched the thing, and we were
Yep.
launching a tech practice at the same
M-
time.
it's my wife's favorite bakery, to be honest. And she was
Oh,
delighted. She was delighted when they opened a spot in Burlington, right? So,
hmm,
she is celiac. My wife is, and the ability to get really good baked goods that are gluten free for her is like a godsend. And when she
hmm,
found out that I knew Phil and that it was his wife that started the shop,
hmm,
she was even more immediately a repeat
hmm.
customer. She would make the trip when Millis was the only location. She would make the trek from Andover, Mass, all the way down to Millis every so
Yeah.
often just to stock up on gluten-free baked goods. So
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So, from that, obviously that conversation, we've obviously worked alongside each other a little in parallel paths.
yeah.
I deviate a little bit in the CNI world at a certain point, and kind of where we are in our lives. Obviously, we're older. Um, we've pivoted into different things. Um, our children are now out of the house.
Mhm.
We're empty nesters. I'm enjoying life. I think, unfortunately, I think you have a tendency to work harder when the kids are
Mhm.
out of the house. You don't realize when to stop because
Yeah.
it's just you and your spouse. Um, but I'd love to talk a little bit about kind of your venture background and where your career has gone.
Sure.
And, we use this word pivot all the time, right? It's just nature for early stage growth tech companies, life science companies, talk about pivot, 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 pivot. But I
Mhm.
also think in our careers, I think in a lot of cases, and this is the generation we're in is, we're kind of side saddling the baby boomer,
Yeah.
mentality as you got to work for a company for 40 years and get a pension
Mhm.
and all this stuff, and you basically are sitting stuck in the same job forever.
Mhm.
These days, that's kind of gone out the window, right?
Mhm.
Um, and so let's talk a little bit about where your journey has gone career-wise, and we'll talk a little bit
Yeah.
about, your venture background. So, let's hear about Bessemer and where that thing started. So,
Sure. Yeah. I mean, for context, right? So, I'm a partner here at Baker Tilly, so we're a CPA and advisory practice, right? One of the world's largest right now. We're 10th largest in the country and the world. Um, the part of the practice that I oversee is the technology portfolio of clients that we work with. So across our entire service stack, from our advisory services to our audit and tax. But that journey began way back when, I made a conscious decision when I was in school that I was going to pursue my CPA license. I thought I would be one of those folks that did it for 3 years and got out and would work in private industry once I was certified. But did it for about 6 years. But what in those 6 years with a different firm that is now the morphed into the Boston office of RSM here. During my 6 years there, I was the young kid on the block right out of school that was super passionate about technology, and I loved how we could apply tech in our business in a very stayed in old business. I mean, half our clients at the time weren't even using computerized accounting software. They were using green bar paper, and you'd add up things
The
manually.
daisy wheels. Yeah, I remember the
Yeah,
daisy
yeah, it
wheels,
was
right?
crazy. So when I think back on it, I'm like, when we started actually like, incorporating our laptops or computers into the process, into our workflows, we didn't have like networks, right? We didn't have networked printers. We had a printer that was on a cart, and we'd roll it around, and every time you needed to print something, you'd take it off one person's computer, plug it in yours, and print. So, that was the era that I kind of entered the business with. Um, but while I was there, the partners at the time recognized that I had a real penchant for tech. So even though I was learning the business of public accounting, figuring out, what it was to prepare tax returns and financial audits and things like that, I was also internally helping kind of deploy new technology solutions, which morphed into a client service facing set of services that we started to provide to clients with, a young guy who was a network guy. He could actually do the real technical stuff, and I would help kind of apply the business layer to the equation.
Mhm.
So you asked about Bessemer. So, um, you know, as I said, I was there for 6 years and I wasn't really looking to leave, but um, the team at Bessemer at the time was based in Wellesley. Of course, we had our Menlo Park office, and we had a single office in Long Island, New York. And that was really our back office down in New York. So the two investing offices at the time, anyway, were Wellesley and Menlo.
Mhm.
And they were looking for a VP of IS that had a CPA license. They wanted someone who could, identify how to improve things operationally, internally for the firm, but it could also help as they sort of did deal diligence on target investments and things like that. So when they sought out to find that person, I had been writing before it was called blogging. I was essentially writing a blog on a weekly basis for the Massachusetts Society of CPAs called my Tech Tip of the Week, right? So it was tech tips
Mhm.
for CPAs, and I was writing those for some time, and Bessemer launched their search, and the search professional Judy Sundu. Judy was I'm sure she's long retired. She used to do a lot of the firm's recruiting for a lot of their portcos, and they asked her to find someone for this role. So here I am on the front page of the Mass Society of CPA's website, talking about technology with my license, and without going into all the nuance, I was kind of the perfect fit. So I was with
Mhm.
Bessemer from '98 to 2001.
Yep.
Um,
Yeah.
got to see a really interesting period of time in venture. Not that there's not been others since then, but a lot of the infrastructure of the internet of its time was being built. So there was a tremendous amount of investment going into network switching equipment, long haul equipment, telecom, as well as kind of call it the first generation of internet and e-commerce deals, right? So,
And the
you know,
internet bubble burst, right?
yes, yes.
Yeah.
So, we were meeting with companies like PayPal and Google and whatnot while they were private and still, raising their Series B and Series C rounds and so forth. So, that generation of companies just were a part of my early kind of DNA in that environment, that space. So when the bubble popped, to your point, I started to learn new terms, things like down rounds and things I hadn't seen
Cram
before.
downs, yeah.
Cram downs as well, right?
Yep, yep.
Um, so I decided to make that safe switch back to public accounting, and I joined a team north of Boston called the MFA companies.
Mhm.
And from there, for the next 20 years, I helped build the firm, build the client base there. We went from about 25, 30 heads when I joined the firm to over 200 before we merged and sold to Baker Tilly. But our focus was working with fast growing venture backed technology companies. And we became one of the de facto go-to solutions for accounting and advisory services to venture backed companies.
Yeah. And
So
to add to that, and
yeah,
to add to that too, is that at that time, if you were a, early stage tech company, VC
mhm,
backed, and, there was a stigma that if you didn't have a Big Four audit, you were a, you were a loser. You weren't worthy of being funded, right? And
right, right,
unfortunately, a Big Four audit is, $250,000, $300,000.
yep,
And I think you proved the case that, a smaller mid-tier firm with better service delivery could compete in that market. I
yeah,
thought that
yeah.
was important to show that. And
Well,
obviously other
thank you. Yeah,
firms, that's the way I
yeah.
looked at it is, well, maybe it was Big Five back then. I don't know. Big
No, I
Six.
was Big Four then. Yeah,
Was it
yeah,
Big Four? Okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
They'd already consolidated down by then. So,
Hmm. But
actually, well, no, you know what? I take that back. You're right. At the very outset, 2001, Anderson was still around, so it was Big Five still, right? Um,
yeah, that's
but
right.
it wasn't shortly thereafter that Anderson fell apart. So,
Hmm.
um, uh, and so yeah, and in fact, my partner Michelle Kupka was from Anderson in their tech practice, and joined only about 10 months after I had come into the firm, right? And so
Hmm.
the two of us really spent a tremendous amount of our time really focused on that venture backed market for many, many years. So, but yeah, so, and today, I mean, here at Baker Tilly, I've got um, a continued personal passion for the venture industry, right? So I still love talking to early stage seed and venture funded companies. I've started to put my own money, if you will, towards into relative to the commitment to that industry. I've got a number of different funds that I've invested in, and I've
Hmm.
primarily focused on early stage
Now,
funds. So,
Did Baker Tilly have an existing tech practice prior to the
so
acquisition
we
of
we had
MFA?
a
Or?
we had an existing, yeah, good question, because we had an existing tech client base, but not a dedicated technology industry practice, right? So the firm was born out of the Midwest, had a really strong presence in other industries like energy and manufacturing and construction and real estate, healthcare, things like that, financial services. But the technology clients largely came through acquisitions, right? So on the West Coast, the firm acquired a large practice there that had a lot of technology clients. Here in the East Coast, us and a couple others helped kind of build up the East Coast presence of tech. And when we merged in, the addition of our client base, coupled together with those others I just alluded to, created a tipping point for the firm. Our revenue base today, roughly about 10%, is being derived from work with technology companies, both large and small. So we
Mhm.
continue to work with and serve the early stage venture back market and the seed stage market, but we've also got some really large companies like HP and Tesla and things like that. Companies like those that we're able to service in different capacities. You mentioned audits earlier. We're not doing audits for those guys, but there's a whole host of other things that we do, and we can
Yeah,
we can apply our expertise with too.
yeah. And with obviously with the acquisition, you were at MFA for 20 years. Obviously, you were building a business from scratch.
Hmm.
And now you've got, a much larger organization that is looking to you
Yeah.
for leadership in the industry.
Mhm.
Talk a little bit about like how you had to pivot there and obviously pivot the way you approach things because
Sure.
now you have a big team, right? And now you're
Yep.
managing folks that are probably, 20 years younger than you, which is obviously a challenge. I mean, I have young
Or-
kids too, and
Yeah.
I know what it's like to talk to a 21-year-old. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, or in some cases, I'm actually, I argue in the other direction. I mean, for 20 years, I was growing my career, of course, but um, you know, uh, the part of the practice area outside of the industry focus that I had was running the audit and assurance practice at MFA. And so, a big part of our model in public accounting in general, but also our specific model is
Mhm.
hiring new young graduates out of school, come in as staff accountants. And so, to your point, there's a generational gap absolutely that exists. Um, when you relate it to the pivot, though, in some cases, I'm dealing with a lot more peers than I ever had, or even older peers
Yeah,
than I ever had before. So, um, that's even been just a mind shift change to kind of keep in mind and think about. But in terms of that pivot that you're referring to, right? I think that instead of being an in-market person who's primarily driving new business to the firm and
hmm
overseeing client engagements, client relationships, keeping a concise team, in this case, in my case, a group of auditors. At its peak, it was about 80, 85 team members, right?
hmm
Uh, you know, keeping them all rowing in the same direction with the firm's objectives. Now all of a sudden, I'm find myself where um, I'm driving top line growth for our tech industry as a whole, working with a number of counterparts in sales and marketing. So all these organizational experts that we have, and to your point, trying to think about the strategic direction of the practice and how do we exert all of these resources and our the permission, if you will, that we have in market,
hmm
or how do we get it for other things that we'd like to be doing for clients that we're not currently doing in a certain market. So thinking about those kind of things, and so I've had to step away from the the human capital resource management side of things,
yeah,
and refocus those energies in a different direction. Similarly, I'm really responsible for a lot fewer client engagements than I ever have been in my career. So again, reshifting that mindset and my energies so that it's more about how do I make my partners and other leaders in the firm successful. Whereas, you know, not that I would say it was ever selfish, but I would articulate it in such a way that, I spent 20 years thinking about how do I make the firm successful, but also how am I being successful, right?
yeah,
And I think as I've pivoted into this new role, um, I think a lot less about, how am I succeeding personally, and more so about how do I really leverage these folks and how do I help them create wealth and professional success and satisfaction and all the other things that they may have in their idea of what success means. How do I create the environment that helps them achieve that?
yeah.
And I
I,
know and
you know,
trust that
yeah,
that's help of the whole firm and myself, but that's a definite mind shift as I've kind of taken on this new set of
yeah.
responsibilities here.
And I would say, like as you get older and you're more experienced and you've kind of seen it all. And my experience is obviously I pivoted into more of a advisory role,
Yep.
senior strategic thinker,
Yep.
for Fifth Line and for my other work. But I'm working with, younger folks who, you think you're just taught, sometimes you just rattle off what you're thinking about a certain situation and you realize that they haven't seen what you've seen. So
Mhm.
it's sort of like you got to have shift your mindset to say, wait a minute, I'm in a teaching role here. My, while I'm the leader on this particular project, I should
Yep.
be sharing with them like this is how we should be looking at it, or this is what do you think about this? In other words, it's more
Yep.
like because you're right, when you're younger, you're more about yourself and
Yeah.
driving the success of whatever you're doing in the firm, right? So
Yep.
it's it is a pivot of mindset is how I would say it. It's sometimes it's hard to let go. You're like sometimes you just want to grab and take on the project yourself, but it's like, wait a minute, I have people that can do this. It's just
Right.
it's a trust thing. And you're like, okay, come on, let them learn, let them figure it out in this space. And like you mentioned, you're working with obviously peers and some people that are older, but again, they may be coming from a different industry
Mhm.
expertise. So, looking at certain industries where you're like, okay, well, you're coming from construction or healthcare or that, but this is how tech kind of works. Tech is investor backed versus family owned businesses are completely different.
Yeah.
Different mindset, different exit
Totally.
strategies,
Yeah.
things like that. So
Yeah.
there is a
Yeah.
pivot there. I can see that.
No, absolutely.
So
Yeah. And
eh,
even like, when we started to define what does the strategy look like for our tech practice, right? And to your point, your family-owned business is going to have very different needs and objectives than some other form of business. So, we've actually looked at it first through the lens of what the capital markets look like. So let's focus our energies on emerging venture-backed companies differently than we attack our opportunities for middle market private equity backed deals, right? And so on and
mhm.
so on. So we actually have been kind of focusing our efforts in a different way that isn't specifically about is it AI versus robotics versus
Yeah.
something else, right? So
Well, the other pivot too, and this has more been just a shift, I guess, a paradigm shift really is when we first started together, obviously doing what we did. And
mhm.
I started my career at Valley Bank back in the 90s. And,
Yep.
you were obviously in the space where you started with Bessemer and moved on. And there were a very discrete and small population of venture capitalists.
Mhm.
Um, Now you had a few folks who were high net worth individuals or angel investors, as they
Oh,
call, but over the last 20 years, there's been an explosion of private capital coming
mhm.
into the market. Now it's almost like who's not a VC? And what's the definition of a VC firm?
Sure.
Um, I would imagine you're seeing obviously the explosion of family offices being more active with
Mhm.
these companies. A lot of people have cashed out, since the early
Yep.
generation of the internet, and
Yep.
their VCs and their high net worths and their, obviously, funding companies. So where do you see that kind of shaking out? Because that's almost as sustainable where you have maybe too much capital chasing too few deals. Um,
Yep.
I think that might be a shakeout somewhere down the road, but again, it might also take a lot of some of these folks taking losses on their investments to
Yep.
maybe shrink the capital pool. I don't know. And
Yep.
also private equity is there's a nuance obviously between private equity and venture capital, but private equity is more driven around EBITDA and
Mhm.
a little bit of a different mentality, but they're obviously moving into the venture space. So,
Yep.
I mean, I've seen that pivot. So
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. I think you,
yeah,
I
there
think
is
you
a
just
lot of
like I
unpack.
think you just like have like 8 topics all rolled into one statement. But no, I mean, but I mean, your commentary is not it's not inaccurate. I mean, there's been a lot of change in the venture industry, as in any industry, I would argue.
Mhm.
But and everything just from what the definitions of like series stage investments, right? I mean that,
They got blurred, just like my background.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. They
Yeah.
mean all sorts of different things to different people, right? But and to your point, I mean, a lot of new funds have been created. I think the real litmus test is the funds that get to a third fund in their life cycle. Um, to me, are demonstrating this. They really are probably getting some traction as investors and yielding some success, right? Because um, I'll say this somewhat tongue in cheek, but it's easy to get your first fund raised, right? Relatively speaking.
Yeah, pass the
But
hat amongst your
yeah, yeah,
close friends and raise
right. But
75,
then, ex
$100 million and yeah,
well, yeah, and whatever the
yeah,
number is, right? But
yeah,
to get the second fund, right? That's where all of your existing LPs are sort of questioning and asking, okay, so how is fund one doing? How has it performed? What kind of returns has it yielded so far, right? And so it jumps the bar up to get fund two raised and closed. So if you've gotten past fund two and now you're trying to raise for fund three, um, to me, there's an unofficial litmus test of, okay, there, without even knowing any of the underpinnings of what's going on, what's transpiring, what the fund performance is, they're probably doing something right if they're able to close that third fund.
Yeah.
And they've got a good team of professionals and investors around them. Now, granted, there could be other storylines underneath all of that, and that's a generalization that may not always be true, um, but certainly, I mean, there's a lot of capital that's gotten raised um, over the last decade into new funds, and
Mm.
I'm interested to see how this plays out now with everything that's transpired during 22, late 22 and 23, and then
Mm.
decline in valuations and the difficulty people are having that are trying to raise a new fund. What that really looks like in, say, another 2 years' time, will
Mm.
be worth telling. But
Yeah. And we're going to segue into obviously 24 and the outlook for this year, but we obviously touched upon the venture investing world and the population of folks out there raising, that are out
Mhm.
there raising funds and investing. But also there was tumult within the banking sector. When I
There was.
started in, yeah, well, when I started in 93 in Silicon Valley Bank, there was Silicon Valley Bank.
Mhm.
Um, and then the traditional lenders who didn't really appreciate, early stage money losing tech companies.
Yeah.
And since that time, there's been probably 10 to 20 entrant, 10 to 20 active players, in the market, but 23 shook it all up. Silicon,
Mhm.
imploded due to various reasons, but I won't get into those now. But then you had First Republic go down, you had Signature go down. And over the last, 12 months since then, you've had other banks, PacWest was acquired by Bank of California.
Mhm.
You had a lot of Silicon Valley Bank personnel move into HSBC, Stifel, other banks as well. So that's obviously shaking up the markets, in
Yeah.
terms of, if you're a young company and you want to layer in venture debt with
Yeah.
a equity round, where do you go? Where did that contact that was at Silicon go, right?
Right.
Um, and in terms of the equity markets, I mean, that's something that's of concern. It's really soft. It's the venture debt market is, it's harder to raise capital, either debt or equity, at this
Mhm.
point in time. I mean, so obviously your portfolio is vast. So what are you seeing amongst your portfolio in terms of the capital raising environment and some insights that you might have for, the folks that are watching this?
Um,
I know
so
I added 12 things right there for you
yeah,
to,
no, I know. I'm like, where do I start with all of this, right? So,
my mind races
um,
that, I have a racing mind here, but
well, and that's fair, and I think, um, honestly, I think to answer that question appropriately, it sort of depends on you know who's trying to raise what, right? I've had a lot of conversations with some early stage founders in the last, I mean, my entire career, but like the last 3 months, let's say, in particular, right? And in some cases they've raised a family and friends round and they're looking for their first seed round, or in some cases they're really trying to raise their first outside money, whatever from whatever source. And so in the very early stage market, um, it's less about the financial metrics because you don't have any, right? It's about sort of who you are, what your own personal track record is, what um, uh, your business idea is, right? And do the investors have a degree of faith that you're able to execute on that vision and that you're going to carry it to the next stage where it becomes fundable by,
well, is it
say,
harder? Well, is it harder now than it was 2 or 3 years ago for a first time entrepreneur to get
yeah,
capital?
no, because it's never easy, right? But
Yeah.
I would actually say it on a relative comparative basis, I would say it's easier for an early stage founder to raise today than it is for a company who raised a B round a couple years ago, right? Because those are the folks that, because they raised when they did, their valuation was here relative to where it might be here today, right?
Yeah.
And so, all the dynamics that come into that, like, do we want to take money at a lesser priced round, right? That kind of thing. What does that mean? What does it tell the market about our business, right? What does it say from the investor, for what, from the eyes of the investor, what does it say to their LPs, right? So,
Yeah.
uh, so there's all kinds of reasons why that makes it really hard to raise money into this. Um, Whereas I mentioned, you've got a bunch of new funds that have been raised over the last 10 years, right? Some of those still have capital to deploy in new investments. And, if you're a seed stage investor and you've got a good idea and it's a good fundable idea, you're more likely to get that for, on
Yeah.
a new company basis versus an established business that's, got that, whatever you want to call that overhead is,
Mm.
that's that overhang on their story, if you will. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah, it depends, but
Yeah.
um, on that relative basis, I would say it's easier on the early side.
And just to
But
kind of
like
wrap up,
but
yeah.
sorry, just to elaborate one last point on that, like,
Yeah.
I mean, I was down in New York, sorry, Dallas, Texas last night and having dinner with, a half a dozen or a dozen so, private equity backed, CEOs and CFOs, with ourselves and JP Morgan Chase represented there. And, we were talking a lot about, um, the valuations and the M&A market for those later stage companies too, right? And um, you know, they're having the same difficulties raising capital. Like, if they needed money, their investors don't even want to talk about it. They're like, look, do what you got to do. You got to cut costs, whatever, maintain or reestablish your positive EBITDA, get to, if you're not already, develop that positive cash flow. But, they want to see them do it without that additive equity capital, right?
Yeah. Keep the burn under control
Yeah.
as much as you
So,
can, right?
so they're feeling it too. Even if they're like identifying potential acquisition targets that they'd like to roll in, it's hard to do right now because everyone's sitting on the sidelines waiting for rates to drop.
Yeah.
Uh, and so, there's challenges across the board.
Sure. And to kind of wrap up our conversations, I guess what would you say? What would you say is the hot areas, the segments of the market? If you what type of companies are the ones that are seem to
Yeah.
be raising money no matter what?
I almost hate to answer it because it seems so very cliche, but I mean, right now, like, and you can just see this in the numbers, right? AI has driven a lot of the new investment, right?
Mhm.
So, AI continues to be on a broad basis, the largest area within tech anyway that's attracting capital. If you asked me, whatever, 6, 9, 12 months ago, robotics was getting a ton of investment, right? And
Yeah,
we
that's
work
right.
with a we work with a large number of robotics deals right now, and uh, I can, even just anecdotally, if I wasn't looking at pitch book reports and so forth, um, I've seen and felt slowdown in that space, but a lot of AI driven investment is really where the money is right now. Other previously hot areas have absolutely cooled, so I've not seen a lot of money going into Web 3.0 or, blockchain type stuff. It's not to say
Right.
it's dead, right? But in terms of attracting real new capital, I haven't really seen it. Um,
Hmm.
and then
Yeah.
lastly, I guess cybersecurity continues. I mean, it ebbs and flows a little bit. I wouldn't say it's the
Mhm.
hottest, but it still attracts a good amount of capital. I mean, I think everyone recognizes that the cybersecurity challenges are constantly changing and evolving, in part because tech is constantly changing and evolving, and the bad actors out there are constantly finding new ways to circumvent
Sure.
whatever
And they're
measures.
using AI to
Yeah,
hack,
is exactly right. So, and
and
and in fact, AI will probably create a whole new generation of AI-driven cybersecurity solutions too. I mean, I've met a few in the market already, but I haven't seen them en masse. But I'm
Yeah.
quite sure that there's a whole bunch of startups out there that I
Well, we're
just haven't.
probably AI generated right now. We don't even know it,
So.
but.
Well, there is that argument that we're living in the matrix, right?
We,
So
we we are. We're just
why,
sort of,
how would we know it?
images on a screen. We don't really
Yeah.
exist, but.
Yeah.
Well, thanks a lot for spending time with us and getting
Yeah,
your
happy to
insights
do it.
about, and obviously talking about, for folks to hear about where your career has gone, over the last 25 years,
Of course.
and how you continue to, help the community grow, and obviously help folks understand venture a little bit better. And obviously
Yeah,
you're working for an organization that, kind of new tech, maybe basically from acquisition. So obviously you're
sure,
educating those folks as well.
sure.
So thanks very much for your time, and I really appreciate it. Thank
Appreciate
you.
it, Pete. Thank you.